So this moves us into the Q&A for Eugene and Ben. We've got a few in the Q&A, so continue to type your questions in. We've got about, I think, 20 minutes for questions. Nope, 10 minutes for questions. I think we can get them all in. So Eugene, one for you, and I guess Ben, you as well, if you have something to add. Can you explain the importance of disclosing multifamily buildings this year?
Absolutely. To us, benchmarking represents both buildings and behavior. And it really helps us to understand both. I think oftentimes we separate the two, but they're really integrated in the benchmarking program. I really appreciate what Commissioner McAllister recently said. And he mentioned that self-care is community care. And I really believe in that. And it was a brilliant way of summarizing, particularly right now under the unrest that we're all experiencing nationally. And multifamily buildings represent just a whole host, and I think an illustration as it relates to equity and addressing environmental justice. The message is pretty clear that environmental justice does not mean just us. It means a community and all of the community, and benchmarking actually allows us to examine the entire building ecosystem, both commercial and multifamily, as a matter of fact, across sectors, private and public, and geographic territories. And as Ben had mentioned, how we address public health and advance our goals to decarbonize.
Yeah, and just to build a bit on what Eugene said, I'm really excited to get the multifamily benchmarking data back at the state level and have it presented on the dashboard that Eugene showed, because we'll get a sense of how multifamily stacks up to commercial in terms of compliance. In the multifamily sector, kind of the building owners and managers can be a bit less sophisticated than the commercial sector, and we'll have more information to kind of help address issues related to compliance and really help them out. And at least in the multifamily sector, these are places where people live. Commercial is important. That's where people work. But by looking at the multifamily data, so much of our state lives in multifamily buildings. So I think it's going to be really important to address that. And it also, a lot of issues around equity can be addressed by looking at the multifamily data, because low-income folks, affordable housing, a lot of it tends to be in the multifamily sector. So that will be really interesting to look at, and I'm looking forward to tackling that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that what you mentioned as well, Ben, about layering of data is important, because if you were to start taking the energy use data that we're seeing and seeing, are the lowest performing buildings in areas where there's also really poor air quality? Are they in areas with people who have lower incomes? And just exploring more about those relationships to energy use and you're right, the environment and the community that people live in. So I think there's a lot of potential there. Ben, is there a final report that discusses your studies, and is there a link for it or more information?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. As I mentioned in my presentation, Tab from AEA and I delivered our report to the CEC back in March and presented on that to them. And they will be making it available on a portion of their website, likely in the benchmarking section, as our grant comes to an end at the close of this year. So it will be presented with other deliverables that we're working on as well.
Sure. So it sounds like later on in the summer, folks can email you and find out if it's available.
Yeah, you bet. And I'm happy to discuss it over the phone or via email. Any other findings that I presented, I can definitely converse with folks on that.
Great. So another question for Eugene is, are the state's requirements going to become more stringent over time? For example, will they include more building sizes, building types, or even at some point require performance?
Thank you for the question. There are no current plans at this time to actually become more stringent. That said, that's why we really look forward in partnering with our local governments, as I had said, because we recognize that I think to really achieve the goals of benchmarking, it is that call to action, and local governments are in an excellent position, I think, to actually address it. Buildings have to be looked at from a local level, parcel level, building level, and we're seeing great strides from our partners, from our local governments.
Yeah, just to add on to what Eugene mentioned, more stringent within benchmarking generally means lowering the square footage threshold. So the state set that at 50,000 square feet for both commercial and multifamily buildings. And as you'll see from presentations from the cities coming up later in the forum, their more stringent ordinances generally lower the square footage threshold. There are other parts of it that they'll discuss, but that's generally what it involves.
Great. Ben, can you talk about what modeling programs or software you used for your report?
Yeah, we looked at modeling software called Energy Pro Lite. So the state has a compliance software for Title 24. Basically, that's a software used to run the design of a building to see if it's meeting the energy code of the state. We took that software and pared it down to create a kind of lighter touch tool that requires kind of less time to set up an energy model for specific existing multifamily buildings. So that's the software that we looked at and analyzed in our report. And that's great too, because I work on developing that software through my grant. And that software is used with multiple programs, both here in the Bay Area and down in Southern California, multifamily energy efficiency programs. So by doing this benchmarking work and then comparing modeled energy usage to actual usage that we had with benchmarking, we were really able to identify areas where we could improve the tool and use the grant to work on that as well.
Great. So there's two questions that came up about schools. So the first is, what is the CEC or others doing to ensure public school districts receive their data for gas and electricity use, and how does it work if there are multiple buildings with multiple meters at each campus? And then again, the other question was similar about visibility into public schools, since they're a great area to demonstrate for equity and climate justice. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. When you think about students and the age of students, I have to say it's a tough nut because there are so many districts, and part of the things that we're learning in the program is really having that right contact and connection with the array of school districts, and being a part of that discussion that I know that they're having maybe among themselves. And so we're looking for any kind of opportunities, and I certainly would invite people to contact me to actually offer suggestions on how do we actually penetrate and get schools actually benchmarked, including universities and state colleges and our community college systems too, which I've just recently started that discussion on.
Yeah, and I'll mention too that some school districts do have sustainability staff. They tend to be massively underfunded. Some don't even have sustainability staff. So, you know, in these times as we're thinking about city budgets and where the funding can go, I think a really good use of those funds would be going to school districts for sustainability staff to help them benchmark their buildings, lower energy use, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and free up funds to educate their kids.
Great. Is there an integration for Energy Star Portfolio Manager to report benchmarking data to the CEC?
Sorry, say that again, Emily.
Is there an integration with Energy Star's Portfolio Manager as a way to report benchmarking data to the CEC?
Yeah, so I didn't want to get too much into the particulars of how benchmarking is actually done during my presentation because I had limited time, but thank you for bringing that up because it is an integral part. Energy Star Portfolio Manager is a tool that's was developed by the EPA, so it's available nationally, and it's a way to working with the portals that the IOUs have where you can collect your energy usage data. It then gets connected into Energy Star Portfolio Manager where you have building asset data. And then that will spit out information regarding kind of an Energy Star score, which allows you, it's between a 1 and 100 and allows you to compare your building to others based on a score, but it also produces the energy use intensity as well, which I talked about during my presentation.
And ESPM is codified into law, into state law, and in our regulations too.
Right, so you have to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager for benchmarking. And again, I'm happy to delve in that with anybody who's on this forum today if you want to follow up with me afterwards.
So we have some more questions that have been popping up, but we only have 1 more minute. So I am going to close with a question that is, you know, I think it makes sense. Someone was surprised at the lack of regional or climate differences between the EUIs, Ben. Is it just that the climate effects are swamped by other effects that have more of an impact? Why is climate not the determining factor in energy use?
That's a good question. I mean, climate obviously affects energy use. Here in the Bay Area, we're pretty temperate. You know, we don't have big swings and really a ton of really hot days or a ton of really cold days like you might see in the Central Valley or in some of the more mountainous regions of our state. So it does affect energy usage, but the building's construction, how it's insulated, you know, how leaky is it, and the systems that are installed, how old are they, how efficient are they? They tend to have the lion's share of the effect on how efficient a building is. So it's a good question. Climate definitely affects energy usage, but it's really kind of how those buildings are constructed and the systems within them that determine their energy efficiency.
Great. Well, to stay on time, I'm going to invite Ben and Eugene to please look at the 2 remaining questions and see if you can answer them in the Q&A box so that everyone can get their stuff answered. Okay, before we break, Barry Hooper from San Francisco Department of the Environment is going to give a quick update on a tool that he's been working on.